Day 379 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzy here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. And starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian military losses. And currently, Russia is sitting on 156,120 military personnel losses. Then when we take a look at the hardware losses, 5 Russian tanks, 13 APVs, 2 artillery, and even 1 air defense system, which has always got to be a real incapacitating feeling for the Russian air defense needs. Then we'll move back to the map and we'll start out just across Ukraine. So where overnight Russia launched a large wave salvo of missiles and drones across most regions of Ukraine. And it was the first in almost 3 weeks of large missile attacks as well. And Ukraine's Air Force defense destroyed 34 cruise missiles out of the 48 that were launched. Several energy infrastructure targets were hit, causing power outages in different regions. Although internet data network tracking metrics that we take a look at now give us some indication of this overnight rush as well, showing a shortening of the downtime for the real restoration of power throughout the country, for instance, there. Now, several different missile platforms or types were used in this latest wave, including 6 Kinzhal hypersonic missiles, which had not been used before. Though at the same time, it is quite odd that Russia would choose to use this type of missile, as they only have about 50 of these and probably less in stock given their high failure rates that we've already seen. So it does make me wonder why Russia would deplete this particular stockpile. And you know what? Russia even went so far as to hit a residential building all the way in the west at Lviv. So really close to the border with Poland, for instance, there. I'll zoom in there. Which really is so shameful. They should not be operating these things if they're going to hit buildings of this nature, so residential buildings on the other side of the country. I mean, at best, they're criminally negligent for hitting a civilian residential building. At worst, they're simply terrorizing the country. And it's certainly not any type of way to make Ukrainians fall in love with the Putin regime, not by any stretch of the imagination. And as a result of events such as this one and ones just like it, Ukraine has recently announced underground infrastructure facilities to be constructed by next winter to soften the Russian blow. That is, if Russia still exists in its current form by then. Then we'll move across on the map to the Donbas, where, let's see, we'll start out in Vuhledar today. So not a lot of action here in recent times after it was taken about a month or so ago by the Russian forces. But now those Russian forces have relaunched an offensive towards Rozdalivka, so just at the very north of Vuhledar there. But nothing too much from these relaunched offensives has really transpired, so no new gains made. Then we'll move to Bakhmut. Okay, so this Russian sunk cost fallacy of a location continues to go on. So Wagner boss and seedy Uncle Prigozhin put up a flag on an old World War II monument to the east of the city's Bakhmuta River. So somewhere right around here, perhaps in the grey zone. But of course, you'll notice it's not even a Russian flag. So you have these mercenary groups in a bit of a socio-political mix of warlords, oligarchs, and autocrats, with every single one of them vying for more credit and power. But here's the backwards kicker. So when the Wagner forces gloat about their land gains when they have some, they just end up making the real Russian military commanders resent them, who in turn undersupply the Wagner forces with the artillery shells that they so sorely need, or not even supply them at all. So it's not exactly your standard NATO system, and instead it's much more of a dog-eat-dog world by far in comparison. which will never really end up to being to amount to a sort of a conducive or be conducive to total and utter domination or success for a tyrant nation. I haven't gotten into this societal, psychological aspect as well, but societies like Russia's, the way that it's built is systemically flawed in that they just can't cohesively work together. Then more specifically here in Bakhmut, so the two east road bridges across the river to the city centre have since been taken out. I've mentioned that before. Thus the Russian forces really the Wagner forces, have to come from the south and the north and have to do so successfully and methodically to take this town. And above all, they need to be well supplied to do so. Then we'll move a bit further south to everybody's favorite place, so Vuhledar. So a Russian position was hit near Vuhledar again. Not a lot of information on this one. I have to zoom out to get to Vuhledar. Ukraine is a big place. So in this one, you can see it's clearly a case of secondary explosions occurring in what I'm fairly certain was a TOS 1, TOS 1A takeout, which is a Russian multiple rocket launcher system that uses thermobaric warheads. Then moving across, so to Zaporizhzhia, and in particular the nuclear power plant, which is hiding right over here. So due to those Russian strikes overnight, the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant was completely cut off from the power grid, which, as per the energy company owner, Energodem, said, this could lead to an emergency situation with radioactive consequences for the entire world. Now, I realize that this is quite strong, dramatic language they use, and you could argue they're swinging big for international political points. But the thing is here, if you are a nuclear energy operator in a war zone, and there is even a 0.1% chance of a meltdown, you have to take that as a potential absolute 100% certainty. Because a nuclear core reactor meltdown, which is what it is, has to be avoided at all costs. The potential environmental implications are just too important to be lax about. Then we'll move across to some news. So Poland is ready to hand over its MiG-29s as part of an international coalition. And you might remember Poland was really pushing for tanks more than any other country previously, except of course for Ukraine itself. So now Poland is ready to give all of their 23 remaining MiG-29 fighter jets to Ukraine, plus another 6, in fact. Those ones are used for training. And also these ones, of course, MiG-29s, they're Soviet jets, so there's fewer concerns with training or any political maneuvering to get them to the front door, or in this case, purely just across the border from Poland right there. Then in some other hardware-related news, Ukraine has received 2 more Gepard units. So these are the air defense system units, really good for taking out drones, the Iranian Shahed drones, for instance. And to be honest, Ukraine at this point still can never have enough of them. And Russia just continues to prove that as they just performed their most recent wave of missile attacks today. Then in some other hardware news, and this one is actually pretty breaking news, but particularly for hardware. So some sparse details on this one so far, but I'll absolutely be tracking this one. I consider this to be quite important. But Ukraine has now started mass production of a UAV, so an aerial or an unmanned aerial vehicle facility with the ability to fly 3,100 kilometers, so about 3,000 kilometers or about 2,000 miles, which is more than far enough. In fact, that could theoretically get it all the way to Russian Siberia. And you know what? Ukraine's war manufacturing industry is now heavily invested in UAVs of all shapes and sizes, and particularly when it comes to range, and I can all but guarantee Ukraine will see fit to hit many, many Russian military air bases and launch points within Russia itself. And it's super interesting because we have seen enough evidence to suggest now already that Russia's air defense systems within Russia itself are horrendously underperforming, or in many cases, simply not even existing. With UAVs, Ukrainian UAVs getting all the way to Moscow. How is that meant to be possible? So as you can tell, putting the pieces together, this at a certain point will become extremely problematic for Russia. Then in some other news, the capital of Tbilisi in the country of Georgia, which also borders Russia, I might add, is also in the position of cutting out the cancerous growth out that is Russia. So in this instance, tens of thousands of people gathered in front of the parliament building for protests against a foreign agent's draft law, which is basically a wild card law to discredit any opposition that the pro-Russian government see fit to do with. But it certainly appears that the citizens of Georgia recognize that they have a question to ask themselves with respect to this draft bill. And that is, A, do they want to inevitably be forced into lives controlled by the Russian state? Or B, do they want to stand up in solidarity for freedom? So they chose B, and just before recording, I found out that the Georgian parliament withdrew the draft law, so fan-bloody-tastic for that. Then moving across to another Russian mobilization military blunder. So, well, Prigozhin's he himself posts daily complaints about lack of ammunition still. Here instead we have Russian soldiers of the 136th Brigade who will be replacing the 155th Kamikaze Brigade in Vuhledar, and they're accusing their commander of sending all the ammo to Wagner. So we know that's not true. So where did all this Russian ammo go? Oh, that's right, they haphazardly wasted it, firing upwards of 70,000 shells a day for nearly 365 days straight. And of course, Wagner doesn't really have everything they need, so these soldiers aren't quite correct in saying that. And obviously, these guys don't have enough of the stuff either. Russia is undersourced in a war and a literal 1,000 mile front line, depending on how you count it, sometimes even a little bit more. So in a situation like this, with a front line that long, 1,000 miles, just something's got to give in a situation like this. And what's giving right now, or being taken, is the ability for Russian forces of any variety to have enough artillery shells to continue offensive operations. Then moving on into another new segment of this day last year. So nearly this day last year, I'll say, Putin confirmed conscripts and reservists won't be taking part in Russia's military operation in Ukraine, and won't do so either. Gee, so many of those Russian comments never aged well. And it sort of reminds me of troll comments. They age quite terribly a lot of the time. Then in a bit of a funny to round it off with, I quite like this one. So, second best army in the world. Here we go again. So this appears to be 4 Russian soldiers using what can only be described as spare mechanical parts fused together, with the addition of wooden planks for additional seating positions. So if you look closely, we've got 3 guys pushing it and 1 guy steering it. And the pushers are taking a rest every now and then when it's going downhill, but have to get back out again pretty quickly, might I add, when they're going uphill. It just looks like way more effort than it's actually worth. And you could say something like, oh, it's probably a once-off, but it's been well documented. Russian soldiers don't have anything more than a wheelbarrow in many cases to carry their gear as they make their trek to the front lines. And what they complain about a lot of the time is just not having any vehicles. Forget armored vehicles, just even civilian vehicles. So, I mean, the Russian army is going from strength to strength here, or really the expression would be turned around and said from weakness to weakness. For instance, they started off with some armored personnel carriers, then they moved to Scooby-Doo vans. Now they're currently stationed at this ghastly contraption of a setting. And I'm just still so embarrassed for the Russian army, to the point it just kind of hurts my brain. So thanks for watching, guys. I've been really appreciating your support, actually. I just really want to quickly throw this in and mention it. A good example of that is by me being able to cut some corners, such as going to the pricier or smaller grocery down the road, as opposed to instead going to the cost-effective ones much, much farther away. And that's just one of a dozen examples of how you guys have literally given me more time to pump out more videos. So thanks again so much, and I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers.